Wow, Jeff, the recorded e-commerce sales figures for Black Friday and Cyber Monday are staggering, and I'm pretty sure that a large portion of my salary actually contributed towards that amount. But moving on, thank you to everyone that has already started to submit questions. We have a couple that have come through, and for those that have just joined us, we encourage you to submit any questions that you have as they pop into your mind. There will be a Q&A section at the end of the webinar. However, if we are unable to get to all of the questions, we will ensure that your questions are answered once the webinar has concluded. Now, Jeff, I am seriously curious about and looking forward to what cybercrime and the underground economy look like over the past year.
Well, let's go there, Angelique. You know, it was a rather disturbing trend that emerged in 2016, and that trend saw attackers using legitimate Windows programs to download and execute malicious payloads. And it's a tactic called living off the land. Now, it's a funny name, but it refers to attackers using whichever tools are on hand as vectors for their attack's delivery. And usually these are pretty common and so familiar that the average user just inherently trusts them. And the criminals are leveraging that. That includes things like Microsoft Word documents and email applications, PowerPoint and PowerShell and PDF documents, and of course legitimate network administration software and operating system features. Even Internet of Things or IoT devices had become a tool for hackers. So this living off the land doesn't just take advantage of what users have in their environment, it also takes advantage of users themselves because these tools are so ubiquitous that most victims are running these programs or can run them. So they're easy to use for malicious purposes. In fact, they're much easier than methods we've seen in the past, like finding and exploiting zero-day vulnerabilities and writing sophisticated malware and things like that. Now, you're going to notice a theme across this webinar as well as in the ISTR report itself, and that is how these everyday tools have been used and abused by attackers. It's a part of almost every other trend we're going to talk about today. Now, on that note, if you haven't done so already, please go get the Internet Security Threat Report, and not only for yourself, but share it. We offer it to you for free, and in fact to anybody who wants it. So it's so useful in understanding exactly what risks exist for your organization and for your customers and for your employees. You'll also notice that I'm not going to cover everything on this slide, nor I will on future slides. In the interest of time, I can't. So please make use of the available attachments and downloads, which you can access right now, and including in those attachments are these slides plus other documentation and infographics. Now, the most high-profile attack of using living off the land methods actually occurred during the U.S. election of last November. A simple spear phishing email provided access to the email account, including the content and secrets and contacts and details of a man named John Podesta. He was the manager of Hillary Clinton's failed campaign for the U.S. presidency. Now, what's of note is that the attackers accessed Mr. Podesta's Gmail account without the use of any malware or vulnerabilities. Again, there's a lot on this slide, and you can see all the details offline by downloading these slides from our attachments section. They're available right now. But back to the story. This living off the land trend shows a movement away from exploits and custom tools. And it's important to note that there's a malware component to every other attack. There we go. There's the slide. Malware continues to be a significant chunk of the threat landscape, with more than 357 million new variants observed across 2016. But while that sounds like a lot, it's actually not all that bad, because for the first time, the rate of new malware seen on the endpoint, and when we say endpoint, we mean your PC or your tablet or your mobile phone, hasn't changed much. It's only increased by about 0.5% from the previous year, 2015. However, while this rate of new malware variants was pretty stable, for the first part of 2016, the latter half of the year saw actually an explosion of new variants. And this was driven mainly by the high volume of ransomware downloaders that was propagated over email. As you see by the course we're charting at the top of these slides, we're going to be talking about ransomware in just a few minutes, so stay tuned for that. But continuing on malware and cybercrime, you might be wondering how malware gets onto your endpoint or into your organization's environment. And there's a big method right here. The average office worker receives 600 emails per week, and typically at least 5 of those contain malware. Now, of course, email is a pretty vital communication tool, but it's also one of the prime sources for disruption for end users and organizations. And this disruption isn't just being distracted in your work by getting more email. It can range from unwanted emails in the form of spam to more dangerous threats like the propagation of ransomware or targeted spear phishing campaigns. And this is exactly what kicked off the chain of events I covered in the last slide about the 2016 presidential election. The most noteworthy trend that we observed for 2016 was the uptick in email malware rates. That rate nearly doubled from 1 in about 220 emails to 1 in 131 emails in 2016. Now, tying back to the idea of living off the land, email has become the main vector for malware propagation. So you might be wondering, does this apply to me? Who is really at risk? Malware delivered by email hit businesses of all sizes in 2016. But despite the headlines filled with brands that you know and use and love and look up to, it wasn't just enterprises and large businesses that were hit the hardest. It was the small and medium-sized businesses, that is, usually businesses with between 250 and 500 employees, that got the most impact. And regardless of the size of the organization in which or for which you work, all of us are at risk. Now, if email is the hottest vector for attack and malware is the prominent payload, then what are the effects of these attacks? In 2016, over 1 billion identities, well over that, were stolen in data breaches, almost double the number that were stolen in 2015, when just 563 million identities were stolen. And I say just with some degree of amazement. That's a lot of identities. Nevertheless, take a look back at 2014 for the full story. The total number of exposed identities has fluctuated over time. 2016 was actually lower than 2014, although not by much. Yet all told, over 7 billion identities were exposed via breaches in the past 8 years alone. Do the math on who is using the internet, and some people got hit 2, 3, 4, multiple times. Now, we hear all the time about what we call PII, or personally identifiable information. And that's usually like names and contact information, sometimes passwords or login names. But we don't often hear about PFI, or personal financial information, until now. Because that's the credit card or debit card numbers or banking and financial records. And it's those PFI records that amounted to almost 40% of the information that was lost in data breaches in 2016. But that's just what information was lost, not from whom it was lost. Services was the industry most affected by data breaches during 2016, with almost 45% of breaches occurring in the services industry. The second most affected sector was finance, insurance, and real estate. That came at 22%. That is a total of 67%, so the majority of breaches there, well over 2/3. And while those percentages are alarming, what's worse is that it's these same two sectors, these broad verticals, that had the highest number of losses in 2015 too. Angelique?